Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Dolphin Financial Radio Show. I'm Dan Wendell, owner of the Dolphin Financial Group. Today, we're going to be talking about saving for retirement and some recent research that came out that suggests that young people should not save for retirement. That's right. You heard me correct. The research is showing that young people should not save for retirement. This is something that my friend Tony Shore is probably going to have something to say about. Tony, yeah, Nobel Prize winning theory suggests that we should not be saving as young people.
That cannot be correct.
And
Of
considering
course.
you don't age, Tony, that means you should never save.
What? Yeah, because I don't age. You're right. So I should not be saving for retirement. That doesn't make any sense. Young people, haven't we said before in the show though, Dan, that the most common thing you hear, I wish I would have started saving earlier?
Yeah, funny you say that, right? Because that's true. That is something I hear a lot. I got an email from Jonah at our office. He's young. He's in his 20s. And he sent me this article, which I put up here for everyone to read. The title of the article is Many Young People Shouldn't Save for Retirement, says research based on a Nobel Prize winning theory. So
Did you get this from TikTok or where's this from?
No, actually, I looked this up, and then I remember I went back into my head. I said, we talked about this before. Tony and I did a show, and we did it in March of 2020. What happened in March of 2020? That's when COVID hit. I'll put the show up here. It got swept away in the COVID craze.
Yeah, it did.
But I looked back on what we talked about, and we talked about the same concept that is mentioned in this article. And now that this article is new and fresh, people are looking at it saying, okay, all right, I need to figure this out, right?
Yeah.
So here's this research is based on the life cycle model. All right. So what I want to do is review the life cycle model. And the idea is that if you're in the low age bracket or the beginning of the life cycle model, saving for retirement is a no-no. Now, let's take a step back and refresh what the life cycle hypothesis is. This is from the 1950s. Franco Modigliani in the 1950s. He says, in a nutshell, people want a smooth, steady standard of living throughout their life.
Right.
So when you're young, you don't have the income, so you borrow, so you can live the way you want to live. And then as you get older, so you start with no income. As you get older, you have more income than you need. So that's when you save. And then you have the kids coming, going to college and stuff like that. And then you go up again as your kids leave the house. You have more money and you save. And then when you retire, you don't save anything, you spend. So it's kind of like a hump, right? So the idea is when you're retired and when you're young, you don't save because it makes no sense according to this life cycle hypothesis.
Yeah, I don't buy it. I remember when we talked about that curve and talked about when you have more money, that's when you save. You shouldn't try to save when you don't have as much money. But what about the people who do start saving here and putting some money away? They can still reach those tops and then put more away. But I think what you're saying is you save more during certain times and less when you're first starting off or when you're young. Not don't save at all when you're young.
No, the hypothesis and the discussions in this article suggest you should not save when you're young. You should, in fact, do the opposite, which is borrow and, don't put anything toward retirement. And they even talk about it, which we'll get to in a moment. 401k matching, not a good idea. You shouldn't even do that. Okay,
that's crazy.
Ruffling some feathers here. But the question is, do we have the bulk of our savings in the middle age? And do we spend the most when we're young or old?
Right.
And I would say, yes, we do save the most during middle age because that's when we have our highest wages. But I think a lot of people live above their means anyway. So they don't save any at any point. And
Right.
then I don't think people spend the most when they're old. One of the hardest things, one part of my job, which is surprising to me, not anymore, but when I say it to my prospective clients, I say the hardest thing that I have for a lot of my clients in retirement is getting them to spend their money. Most people don't spend their money. They save. If they've grown up saving, then they continue to save in retirement. So they wind up passing that money on to the kids in reality,
Yeah.
to the next generation. So I don't buy this flat spending curve. We've done shows on that. Spending in retirement doesn't go down, but it doesn't go up either. It stays where you're at for the most part. Just spending on different things.
Interesting.
So here's a quote from the director of this group that came out with this new article that I referenced here. His name is Jason Scott.
Mm-hmm.
He says, in economics, we assume that people prefer money today compared to money in the future. Sometimes this is called a time discount. So I agree with that. People want money today more so than money in the future. That's the American way. That is,
I want it now.
An utter lack of delayed gratification. Right?
Yeah.
So the study and this life cycle hypothesis and this idea that you shouldn't save is based on this theory or this idea that people assume they want money now instead of the future, which is why lotto winners take the lump sum versus the annuity.
Sure.
Why people like the lump sum when they leave their employer instead of the pension. But just because people like it doesn't mean that's the smart financial decision to do. Right. So I have a problem with this lack of delayed gratification. I almost feel like this study and this life cycle hypothesis is a justification for a lack of delayed gratification. Of course, people want to have a steady lifestyle. They want to live high in the hog their whole life. Who doesn't?
Right.
So just say, then don't bother saving because you don't have the money. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, when we're young, a lot of us, most people don't save for retirement when they're young, and it's because they want all their money now.
Right.
And when you're young, you want it now. You're not thinking about the future. But that's not a good thing. I mean, it's one thing to say young people want their money now and they don't want to save for the future. That doesn't mean they shouldn't.
Right. And here's another quote from the author. He said, young workers might consider, instead of saving, but actually borrowing, securing a mortgage to buy a house rather than save for retirement. So again, here's another issue I have with this. The idea is you buy a house instead of saving for retirement. That mindset's got to go, because we've done shows on how a house, home equity, is part of retirement. It's the biggest asset for people. So when you say this money is for retirement versus this money is going in my home, those are two mutually exclusive things. Wrong. People all the time come to me looking to retire, and their biggest asset is their house. How do we use that asset?
Right. So that's actually I think that's a good piece of advice. Try to buy a home when you're young, because that's an investment. You are investing in your future at that point.
Right. But what I think the technical terms for investing versus a living arrangement, because here you're assuming that the housing equity is going to grow, which it should. If you take a mortgage, you're paying down the mortgage. So if the house maintains its value, you're building equity. So you are in a way saving.
I mean, as long as I've been alive, home prices have grown. So
right. And I don't see that changing. Now, then they may not go up as crazy, or you may be in a lost decade, which has happened. Home prices, same with the stock market. There's been a decade where the things were flat. So I would have been better off living and going out and enjoying that extra meal out than saving, because I got nothing to show for it. That's I mean, you can make that case, and I think that's what they're doing in this, is to say live while you're young. But I don't like it. I don't like it because you're assuming no growth. Here, the author says early saving could have a benefit from the power of compounding, right? But the power of compounding is certainly irrelevant when after inflation interest rates are zero, as they have been for years, he says. So, okay. So to say the power of compounding is amazing, I fully believe that. My oldest son works. He washes dishes. I pushed him into this idea of if he puts money into a Roth IRA, because he has earned income, he's allowed, I will match it. He didn't jump at it because he is 15 years old.
Right. He doesn't get the benefit. Yeah.
I can beat it in his head and say, listen, I'm matching. I'm giving you what you put $10 in, I will put $10 in free, no strings attached. But when I say, and when he starts saying, well, can I buy the car with it? Or can I, buy an Xbox game with it? And I say, no, that's just for retirement. Already, boom. He's like, forget that.
Yeah. I'm not waiting until I'm 75 years old to touch that money.
He's got 50 years
in his head. Yeah.
But if I showed him, which I have, hey, let's take that 10 and look at when that $10, if you put in $10 now in 50 years, when you're 65, that $10 is $250.
Yeah.
He starts to say, oh, right? So his lifestyle, if he went to this life cycle hypothesis, he'd say, no, I want that $10 now so I can buy the Xbox game to play with my friends. I could buy the new sneakers to be cool and have a social standing with everyone and blah, blah, blah. Is he wrong? No. But if he can live without that money, I don't see how that hurts him. And the case being made by this is that, here's what they say. The principle is, should you save when you are relatively poor so that you can have more when you are relatively rich? The life cycle says no. And that's independent of how you invest. So with my son, the life cycle says, no way, don't put money into the Roth. I don't care if your dad triples what you put in. You should spend it now because you don't have any money. You're poor. So spend it and then worry about saving when you have money. I just don't like it. I don't like it.
Well, it builds unhealthy habits. What you just said would lead to unhealthy habits. So the problem is what I've seen, because I have 3 children and they're almost all adults. I have one yet as a senior in high school. The other 2 are young adults. And what I've seen, and they're very different, each one of them. But I see some have, one of the 3 has really good spending traits and maybe one of the 3 does not. And the one that does not got into bad habits like immediate gratification, instant gratification. And that can permeate their lives. They can be 50 years old and hobbled by that. I wish my parents had done what you did or explained to me finances and made me value money more and value saving it more. They did not. I learned instant gratification, and that's a really hard habit to break that cycle. So this study is saying the life cycle model says, well, I think what that the cycle is immediate gratification, and that's going to be harder to break. Hey, you're young, you don't have any money, so spend what you do get now because you don't have any, and you can save later when you're making bank. Well, making bank might not ever happen because you get into that habit, and then it turns from I'm going to make this and spend it on video games to I'm going to make money, but I'm not making enough to buy a new car or the stereo I want or redo my deck, so I'm going to go into credit card debt. Exactly. As adults.
But don't worry, because you're going to make more later to pay off that debt. It's kind of like the student loan debt. You get the degree, but okay, I'm not against college.
Right.
But if you're going into extreme debt to get a degree that's not going to turn into something, then maybe it's not a smart choice. So this whole life cycle assumes that you're going to have wages increasing because you're going to get into a profession that increases. But what if you don't? What if you cap out? What if, and then you built this lifestyle that is way up here and your income's always here? You'll never get out. But the life cycle hypothesis, along with the research that they're showing, says that's okay. And they say a couple of reasons. So I want to talk about forcing, because you said you get in bad habits. They're suggesting that this auto enrollment into a 401k is bad. Here's what he says. If I didn't understand that I was being defaulted into a 401k plan and I didn't want to save, then I suffered a welfare loss. If I want to go to restaurant A and it's closed and I have to go to restaurant B, I suffer a loss. Yeah, you do. You do. You can make the case that, hey, I didn't know I was getting put into the 401k. And when everyone else was going out for happy hour, I couldn't afford it because I had to pick up a second job or something. Had I had that 401k match in my paycheck, then I would have been able to afford it. So I lose out. And now and the amount of money is so
you lose out on immediate gratification is what you lose out on.
I lose out on my lifestyle. So what the research is saying is that very poor people aren't going to be able to save. So why bother being poor? And then what they do is they go further on this in this article and say, okay, 5 years from now, when I want that 401k and I find out, oh my God, why do I have 401k? I didn't know that. Oh, there's money in there? Give me that. I need that because I'm buying a new house. I am doing XYZ. I'm paying off student loan. And they pillage it. And so the author is suggesting they should get rid of the 10% early withdrawal penalty to make it easier to get your own money. It's like, wait a sec. The point is you're saving for the rainy day. You're saving for the future. And if you're just going to pillage it,
you're saving for a time when you can't work anymore or don't want to work anymore. You're not that's why you're saving. So,
right. You're saving for the.
What is Scott going to do? What is this guy Scott going to do when he gets to retirement if he's never saved for retirement?
Well, so that they address that and they suggest that Social Security is the answer. So they say lower income earners get a higher income replacement via Social Security than higher income earners. So we did a show on this. We did a show on how the progressive nature of Social Security means that the less you make, the higher percentage of your income is replaced by Social Security. And we talked about what's the number, how much percentage do you need of your income? And we suggested 100% of your income is needed in retirement. And for those at the lowest income levels, Social Security can make up 90% of their income. For those at the high income, maybe Social Security only represents 40 or 50% of their income. And so the idea is, well, if Social Security is going to be there and cover basically everything, don't bother saving, just rely on Social Security, which again, it makes financial sense, right? You can make the case, you can run the numbers, the research, and say, yeah, don't bother saving because Social Security is going to be there. But we all know Social Security is not enough.
Right.
It's not enough.
Yeah.
And to do nothing but rely on Social Security, where does that put you in the standing? So the case is made then, well, if I'm going to be at the low bracket anyway, I might as well just spend my money and rely on Social Security. So at least I have some dignity throughout my life and I'm not, living in squalor just so I can live in a little better squalor later. You can maybe make the case that those that are really poor, that are not making even like just making minimum wage, maybe they shouldn't be saving for retirement. Mm-hmm. So that's where this could be for the very low income earner, which is what younger people are. So you can make that case, but that case is projecting you continuing to grow your income in the future and save later. What if you never get there? Then you're going to be destitute. I don't like it. Even though you can make the case, that Social Security is going to replace all your income if you're really poor. Yeah, that's fine. But I don't like it. I don't like the delayed gratification, lack thereof, that this suggests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, what this is for, satisfying instant gratification, which if you just use common sense and logic, it will tell you, no, that's not the way to go. And once you get to be my age or, in your mid 50s and beyond, that's when you look back and say, man, I wish I wouldn't have just blown through money on dumb things. I wish I would have saved it or spent it on better things and saved more because I'd be happier now.
There's two big problems I have with this. That is one of them. You're not going to be in your 50s say, I wish I would have spent more. Now, we have done shows where we talk about regrets. And we talk about how people in early retirement should spend a little bit more, because when you're in your 80s, you're probably not going to be saying, I wish I had more money now. They normally say, I wish I would have gone seen the pyramids before they got washed away by the hurricane. Right. So there is some of that, but to say don't save in your 20s because you're going to save in your 50s, I don't like it. I think there is a justification for instant gratification. The other thing is, and I'll go back to the comment, which was the power of compounding is irrelevant when after inflation interest rates are zero. So what they do in this research is they assume risk-free rates of return, which our treasury notes say, and inflation eats them up. So you're really not getting anything. You're purchasing, you're not, but this is a horrible assumption to make.
Yeah.
You got to assume that if you're in your 20s, you're not going to buy a CD.
Right.
You're not going to put it in the bank. You're going to invest it. And the assumption is, now it's not guaranteed, the assumption is that you're going to get a higher rate of return than inflation by investing in the stock market.
Especially over a long period of time. If you start investing in your 20s and you're investing for 30 years, that's going to grow. If you look at the growth in the market over the last 30 years, even with bumps in the road like 2008 and this year, 2022, the overall projection, trajectory of the markets has been up.
Right. And this is going to speak to the people that started working in 1999 or 2000. Right. Oh my goodness. I've been putting in a 401k, and 20 years later, I'm kind of where I was. I would have been better off just not riding this wave, and I should have gone and bought the latte or the new car, because at least I would have enjoyed it. Instead, I just sat and watched my accounts do nothing. And that doesn't happen. It happens to some people, timing, right? But in the long run, you have to assume that you're investing for the future, and you're going to get a better return than zero with inflation. So I don't buy it. And I think they know that this life cycle assumes a 0% return. Of course, if you're going to assume a 0% return, of course I wouldn't invest.
Well,
you're better off buying a house. You're better off buying, which is an investment in a way. You're better off just living, spending money to live than to invest if you're going to get a zero or negative return, obviously. So the fact that they default the return to zero because of the inflation, I don't like that. I think that's, which is why, for young people, this idea of not saving, just, I don't like it. Maybe for older people that are new, maybe you don't invest it. Maybe you keep it in cash because you're going to be spending it soon. And maybe it's better to not save. And we've done the show on that. That's the show we have, which was don't save, just live off retirement, and don't, because who wants $1 million in the bank when you're 90? Some people do, but for the most part, you'd rather spend it all. So the conclusion is, this research may suggest that young people shouldn't save for retirement. This research actually may be flawed, like I said, with the interest rates.
I would say so.
I think saving for retirement is a good idea. Shouldn't be discouraged. Now, does that make me the traditional, typical financial advisor, save a rainy day, save 20% of your income, blah, blah, blah? No, I tend to disagree with a lot of conventional wisdom, but when it comes to saving for retirement, I do not think that young people should avoid it. I think you're right. It creates bad habits. It doesn't factor in decreasing wage potential. What happens if you lose your job? Right. Like,
I didn't save because I saw this study based on a life curve. So I haven't saved anything. And now I lost my job, or my inheritance fell through. My parents didn't have the money I thought they did, or I didn't get this influx. I've never won the lottery. So now I'm stuck with no money because I didn't save.
Right. And you don't have the savings habit. Or you're just going to turn it on. You're just going to turn. Now I'm 45, and now I'm making an extra $20,000 a year than I spend. You're just going to all of a sudden be like, oh, you know what? I'm not going to spend that $20,000 as I have all my life. I'm just going to say, yeah, you know what? Now it's time to save. And that's typically what happens for a lot of people, because it's not because that's the thing you should do.
So at that point, they're going to stop living. Where
Right.
At that point, you'd have to stop living. And so rather than hit that wall where you have to stop living to save or to be able to afford life, uh, just save a little bit, and when you make less, you save less, of course. And when you make more, you save more, right? But you're always saving in
And
the
you're
ups
living
and
within your
downs.
means. You're living
And you
within your means.
Yeah, well, that's another key right
And I
there.
think this idea of life cycle is don't save in the beginning is basically saying don't live within your means ever.
Yeah, you gotta keep walking past the record stores and pizza buffets.
Right.
You gotta live within your means. You gotta have some restraint.
Right. And
Well,
yeah,
I'm talking about myself, this guy, but
I would
yeah,
agree that in your 20s, Tony, you probably didn't save.
nope,
And it's not that
sure didn't.
maybe it's because, and I'm not saying you regret that, but I'm
Oh, I do.
assuming you don't say, yeah, I'm glad I did that. Right. You're not like,
No, I'm
yeah,
not glad.
the
I'm
science
not
told me
glad I
to.
wasted money. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, and a lot of it's educate lack of financial education, which is what this show's all about, and that's your job. Had I had the financial education back then, and I wish I'd paid attention or cared about finances, but I didn't. And so, really, it's a lack of education on 401ks and what they're for and what they do. That's for older people. I told myself that until I was 35. You know what I mean? It's like,
Last
I don't
year?
need a 401k. Yeah, just last year I figured out that I needed. When I started working with you, yeah, that's been more like 8 years. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I wish I had started putting money into a retirement account when I got my first full time job in my 20s. Yeah.
Yeah. And I started saving. And maybe the problem is the research suggests saving for retirement is the bad idea. And I think what they're suggesting is saving in a retirement account with a penalty to use in an emergency is a bad idea. And maybe I can get behind that.
Yeah,
So
because at some point you first have to build up at that emergency fund.
emergency fund, right,
Yeah,
right,
and so maybe your first years are spent doing that, and you're not putting in the 401k because you have nothing.
right.
You
So
start
I
at
can get
zero.
behind that.
Yeah, and
But
you
that's
wouldn't
not
tell
what this
anybody with
is
no
suggesting.
money in the bank to say you got to start putting all you can into an account that you can't touch for 30 years.
Right,
That does not make sense. That's
right,
true.
exactly.
Good point. Good point.
However, though, I think I would rather somebody not have an emergency savings yet have the 401k match.
That's true. The match. It's hard to deny the power of the match, which is free money and compounding interest. So maybe you have X amount that you're able to save out of each check, and you split it between that emergency fund and the
Right,
401k,
right,
or you do as much as you can to get the match, and then but even then, if you're young, we normally don't focus on people in their 20s, but it's a whole
right,
set of other problems because if you don't have money in an emergency fund and you're in your 20s, I know what you do have in your 20s, mailbox full of credit card offers, right?
right,
So
right,
if you instead of the emergency fund, oh, I've got the 401k match, but I've also run up $20,000 in credit card debt, high
right.
interest credit card debt. That doesn't
And
make
but
sense.
the life cycle models, which is just that's okay. Take the debt because you'll pay it off later. I would argue if you're going to take a debt, you're going to do it in the form of a house, something that's got some equity buildup, which is basically forced savings anyway.
Yeah,
And I think people in
it
this
is.
country need to look at the house as an asset instead of, um, is this non-touchable thing in retirement. More and more people are realizing, yeah, I need to touch that equity in order to live and maintain my
Right.
lifestyle. So,
Yeah.
but again, I think this idea of not saving for retirement in your younger years, I could see where it makes sense. It's not ridiculous, but I also think it's sending the wrong message. And
Yeah.
I would argue that you're better off not saying it this way, just being like, hey, in your younger years, you're not going to be able to save as much for retirement. So don't beat yourself up over it, but don't neglect the 401k match. Don't neglect saving for a rainy day. Don't neglect an emergency fund, and don't squander everything just in the name of I want to live my good life throughout my whole life. And,
Yeah.
I want to
Yeah.
level things out. No, don't. So I don't like it, Tony. Normally I bring research that is positive and I agree with. This one I just simply don't agree with.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. Well, I agree with you and not with the research.
Smart move, Tony. Smart move. He wants back. He wants back for next week, folks.
Yeah.
So we'll end it and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
All matters discussed in today's show are for informational purposes only.
This show is not investment advice.
Dan Riddle nor Dolphin Financial Group are affiliated or endorsed by any government agency.
Investment advisory services are offered through Dolphin Wealth Management, Inc., a registered investment advisor in the state of Florida.
Insurance products and services are offered through Dolphin Insurance, Inc.
Dolphin Wealth Management, Inc. and Dolphin Insurance, Inc. are affiliated companies doing businesses as Dolphin Financial Group.
You should talk to someone at Dolphin Financial Group before implementing any of these strategies or ideas.